Your powers are weak, old man.
You can't win, Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Here's one that I think I'm going to work on. It's interesting. I saw this, I can't remember exactly where I saw it. Somebody might have sent it to me in an email, or it might have been on Facebook. I can't remember, but I went back and I actually found an article that is actually linked to a report coming out of Berkeley. So I'm going to read this, and I may, if I get time, I may go back and mark up the actual study, which is a lot longer, and I won't put it on here. If I do it, it will be on Patreon. But I want to put this into the record because I haven't seen anybody do this to my knowledge. But this is coming from CNN. Most major metropolitan areas have become more racially segregated, a study shows. Some of the nation's largest metropolitan regions have become increasingly segregated in the past 30 years, underscoring racial inequalities that have led to poorer life outcomes in Black and brown neighborhoods, according to a study released Monday by the University of California, Berkeley's Othering and Belonging Institute. The study found that 81% of the regions with more than 200,000 residents were more segregated in 2019 than they were in 1990, despite fair housing laws and policies created to promote integration. So are they saying that gentrification has failed? We shall see. Some of the most segregated areas included Chicago, Milwaukee, and Detroit in the Midwest, and New York and northern New Jersey, and Philadelphia in the Mid-Atlantic. Conversely, large metropolitan areas that saw the biggest decrease in segregation included Savannah, Georgia, San Antonio, and Miami. And could it be that Black people have moved from larger metropolitan areas? Possibly. According to the study, segregated communities of color have lower incomes, higher unemployment, lower home values, and are less educated than segregated white communities. However, the report indicates that Blacks and Hispanics who grew up in segregated white communities were able to earn significantly higher incomes than those in communities in color, of color. The takeaway from these findings is that race itself appears not to be the determining factor in an individual's life outcomes, the Institute said in a news release. Rather, the more consequential factor for life outcomes is the environment in which the individual is immersed. That's a no-brainer. I've said that for years. Stephen Menidian, the Institute's assistant director and the project's lead author, called the findings both startling and disturbing. According to Menidian, the study proves that residential segregation is the root cause of many of the disparities that many protesters and activists have been fighting against. What the study is illuminating is that racial segregation is the mechanism that sorts people into environments that are healthy, that are well-resourced, and have access to strong amenities and public goods, and those that have disinvested neighborhoods, Menidian said. Lack of access to health care and police brutality also disproportionately impact segregated communities of color, the study notes. That's a no-brainer right there. Menidian said one explanation for increased segregation is that while Asians and Hispanics remain the fastest growing minority groups in the country, they're becoming more segregated from white communities. This is driving up the nation's aggregated level of segregation, he said. The study did not explore why these groups are not integrating. The argument that people chose to live in communities that are comprised mostly of residents who look like them, and a century-old policies, practices such as redlining, have had lasting effects on large metropolitan areas, he said. While we are in a dire spot with respect to race in the United States, Menidian said, we have a greater awareness that there is clearly a problem of structural racial inequality, but there is a lack of awareness of the nature of the problem. The report does not discuss solutions for integrating communities and creating better life outcomes for people of color. Yeah, the only way out, really, and I think they already know this, is for intermarrying. It's funny when they talk about segregation, they don't talk about Asian, Latino, and Black. They talk about whites and non-whites. And I think the problem is that the whites are shrinking and the non-white groups are growing, which would concern them. But the factor is that they do go to school together, and that's going to be the biggest differentiation. And I do think with the way they teach and the way kids learn, and I think automation and technology is going to equalize a lot of things. I really do. And even that, what are they going to do with the poor whites? Since basically, are they going to keep poor whites on the fringe when they can't afford to live there either? That's the old problem. Poor whites are probably going to be mixed in with the other groups because they can't afford to live in the white areas. So is gentrification pushing Black people and Latinos out of certain areas? And when Black people and Latinos get pushed out, where do they go? It's obviously, it's a no-brainer that they're going to put resources into white schools, okay? Schools, non-white, I should say non-people of color schools, for lack of a better term. But when they close Black schools and they bust little Black kids, say like in Chicago, to white schools, what happens? Or they gentrify a Black person's neighborhood, but slowly but surely erode the neighborhood and push Black people out. Where do they go? They got to go somewhere. And if they're gentrifying all the Black neighborhoods, they got to mix. They're going to have to mix. So evidently, the 81%, the Black people have to be going somewhere. Are they going to poor towns in other areas, or are they relocating down to the South, like Texas, like say Georgia, like Miami, places like that? Or are they migrating to smaller towns? Fascinating, because Black people are moving, are leaving. So I wonder if that's having a factor. It's a real interesting subject, and it's one that we're going to have to investigate further. So it's going to be an interesting subject to pursue, because I'm fascinated by the rate of admixture, because I see it amongst the, like I said, the so-called lower classes. I've actually thought about that, because the more well-to-do people that do live in a close to and a proximity to whites are actually going to get absorbed by, I'll say, the upper class white people, and probably integrate into that society. And I think it's going to be mostly by class, which is not shocking, but it's kind of interesting to me that the Asians and the Latinas and the Black folks are becoming what they call people of color, along with enough of the poor whites. There's way more poor whites. If you think about the amount of poor whites, which is about anywhere from 15 to 20%, maybe even more. If 42% of all people earn less than $18,000 a year, that means 40% of white people, or at least 30% of white people, earn less than $18,000 a year. That means there's a whole lot of white people that are probably going to get mixed in this category. So I know it might be segregated as far as the urban areas, but I have a funny feeling that as this thing goes along, I think that it's going to reveal that you're far more mixed than not. And I think the biggest shift is not Black and white. I think the biggest shift is the Latina, or the Latin population, which is the fastest growing, but it's also mixing in areas where Black people actually are. So Black people are actually very well mixed in urban areas where Latinos are, especially in places like big cities like California, like the Bay, and like Los Angeles, and places like Houston, San Antonio, Dallas. You see far more Latinos mixed in with Black people. So that may be accounting for a lot of this so-called segregation. Have to take a closer look at it. It's going to be an interesting study. I'm fascinated to see what the numbers are, and exactly what their criteria is, what their measurements are. So I think the devil is in the details, and I think they have a study, but I think we're going to have to get into the actual tables and see how they figure this, because I am fascinated. You know, I wish it was like city by city, but I'm sure that's a huge study. But that's all that I have for this one. And like I said, I dropped it because I was fascinated by it. And if I'm fascinated by it, well, you guys may or may not be interested, but I know there's a few people out there know the good doctors probably will be, because they're good social scientists, and even some people that are at SYSBM. I think that they're going to be fascinated by it because it's going to impact them more than anybody else. But with that, I'm going to jump off here. This is BGS out, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.